Hello everyone, welcome back to Powerful Nothing, a Magic the Gathering Cube podcast. I'm your host Dan, and as always, I'm joined by James. James, how are you doing, my boy? Are you well?
I'm well. I've been drafting an unhealthy amount of Lorwyn Eclipsed. It's been a lot of fun. I've been going off the rails with some. I have a minor obsession with trying to draft Tree Folk at the moment, and it's not been good for the rank, I would say.
But has it been fun? Is the main question.
I've had a lovely time. I have so many 3/7s in play. You know, it's phenomenal.
Nice. Well, that does kind of dovetail nicely into our main topic for today. For those who've been enjoying Lorwyn Eclipsed, today we're going to be talking about creature type matters in Cube. Lorwyn Eclipsed is a creature type matters set. It matters the creature types that you're drafting. And we're going to discuss some bits today on constructing a cube with that in mind. Kind of like taking the Lorwyn Eclipsed environment and kind of just making more of it and really leaning into it and making that what the whole cube is about.
Yeah, for sure. So not a Lorwyn Eclipse sets cube, but a Typal matters cube where most of your decks, or maybe even all of the decks, are going to care in some way about the creature types.
Yeah, exactly. And kind of like, unlike things like a powered cube where kind of like we can debate the correct choice on like, is this card more powerful? Kind of like in a vintage power cube, you're aiming for high power level. And like same as like a pauper or peasant cube, you're aiming for the best version within the constraints. This is going to be more kind of like a advice episode or kind of things to consider if you're building one of these cubes, because there isn't a correct way to build this type of cube. It's like there are good things to do and bad things to do, and we'll kind of guide you through those a little bit. But kind of like some people love Kithkin, some people love goblins. Like when these cubes are going to come together, they're going to be tailored more to the person making them and the play group rather than a hard and fast rules of like a vintage power cube of like, well, you have to run these blue cards, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. And it's very subjective because it's about the play experience you want at the end of the day, right? And that's going to be how you select the types you care about, but also how you want to structure your cube. And what do you want most of the decks to look like? Do you want most of the decks to be like, I'm this one, I care about this one creature type and I've got 14 of them in my deck? Or do you want people to have to be a bit scrappier than that? You know, like, do you want to make it a bit more difficult so that people have to sort of fight to make the lords a bit better, you know?
No, that's exactly. Because like one of the reasons we want to talk about this is not just because the current set is supporting this type of environment, but also because like Typal matters and like creature type matters environments, like they are so popular in Commander. Like in that format, it is the nice thing of like, oh, I want to play an elf deck, I'm going to jam all the elves in. Like it's a very kind of good base for a deck, and it's very popular in Commander. But that hasn't really translated over into Cube. But there is definitely space for it to grow, and that's kind of one of the reasons we wanted to have this conversation today. So yeah, this episode is more about kind of giving advice if you're doing a whole cube based around creature type matters rather than just like an archetype. So this is like less of a conversation on like in a budget cube, I have like goblins being my Rakdos archetype, but then no other archetype in the cube caring about creature types. This is more a conversation for a grander environment where everything is kind of this type of thing. So that's what we're going to be focusing more on today. But I think it's probably a good place to start is let's actually define what is a Typal matters cube, what is a creature type matters cube. So for me, this is a cube where multiple archetypes revolve around drafting multiple creatures that share a creature type. So like Lorwyn Eclipse, like original Lorwyn. Is it Lorwyn or Lorwyn? Does it?
I've been saying Lorwyn, but
let's go with that.
You can say what you want.
I thought it was Lorwyn, but there should be more vowels in it for that. So yeah, let's commit to Lorwyn here and now. But yeah, also like Bloomburrow, for example, another great Typal matters set where the decks are less about raw efficiency, they're more about synergy. It's more about getting a bunch of the same types of creatures together that have a more powerful effect when they're combined. Like, an example of this is like it is like a deck that cares about goblins will still probably want a card like Lightning Strike, but a card like Tarfire that is also a goblin will go up in its estimations. It'll want it more because it synergizes with other things that the deck is doing. And one thing with that, though, is because you're not using necessarily the most efficient cards, the power level is going to be down a little bit. It's not going to be like it's probably hard to get one of these cubes to be the power level of the high-powered level cube. You're looking more like budget cubes. You're looking more around the power level of like a Masters Draft or like a Modern Horizons set. Would you kind of go along with that, James?
Yeah, I mean, you can... Obviously, like, there are some very powerful Typal payoffs, so you can push the power level if you want to. But when you're pushing the power level within a constraint of something like a Typal cube, it's going to really restrict where you can go. Because firstly, you'd have to sort of just pick the most supported creature types, right? And then you can't then support, here's like a more interesting take on that creature type. You've got to go with like what are the most efficient payoffs and the most efficient beaters. I think the trap you fall into if you try and just max power level is that ultimately, because you're building around creatures and everyone's going to be a creature deck, you will end up in a spot where everything's a beatdown deck. And that's kind of not that fun, right? You need to... I think most of the time you're going to want to be willing to rein the power level in a little bit to make room for some of the more interesting Typal payoffs that aren't just put loads of this creature type in play and attack.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's definitely something we're going to be digging into today. But just specifically on the power level as well, yeah, like you have nailed it. Like some things that come with this is that it does mean necessarily you don't need the most efficient like fixing though. Like tap lands can be fine in these environments. Like you don't need to run Swords to Plowshares or Path to Exile. You can run like the 2 or 3 mana version of these effects. Like that is one nice thing with these type of cubes is that they can be more budget because yeah, as James mentioned, like the optimal version of all these cards is probably more boring than the fun versions you can kind of build by trying some variety in your archetypes. But that is something that we're going to be getting into. But kind of like another reason, so moving on to kind of picking creature types, and this does kind of build in, this kind of is linked to power level. One thing you are saying when you are building a creature type matters cube is that I am limiting the number of cards I can pick from. And that will immediately lower the power level, lower the ceiling of your cube, because you don't have access to all of the most powerful cards. You might have access to some of them, because you're trying to make them work in the creature types that you've chosen. And again, there is no right or wrong way of doing it. There is no, like, here is the best creature types, run these in all your colors. Run what... It's your cube, build what you want. But, like, for kind of context of what we're talking about here. So, at time of recording, there are 31,183 unique Magic cards. Of those, you have about 4,000 humans... You have about 650 elves, about 600 zombies, 500 goblins, and then everything else goes down really quickly from there. So, like, Phyrexians and vampires and dragons are around the 400 mark. Most things are below that. That is not a tremendous amount of cards to pick from. Like humans is quite high. Humans, will admit, is very, very high because everything's a bloody human. But that's kind of the lens we are looking at this through. And, like, it does mean that kind of like if you go for more niche creature types, there can be a lack of redundancy and there can be lack of varieties in decks. I'm thinking like Kithkin is we've only really seen in Lorwyn and maybe some master sets or maybe some very, very old sets, but kind of like as a creature type, it's going to be harder to support than something like elves just because you have less options to play with, basically. Kind of like, would you agree with that, James?
Yeah, for sure. And if you're running the sort of less supported types, you kind of take choice away from yourself as well, because you end up just having to run all the playable ones. And so it's harder to sort of build in more of a direction. You know, you're just like, you're a playable Kithkin, you're in the cube, congratulations.
Exactly. You are a on-rate power and toughness attacker, you're fine, yeah. No, exactly. But there is some help here, and I do think this is actually a good way of making the draft environment more important. It's like we're going to use the D&D race and class way of describing this here, but effectively, jobs and classes also count in these types of cubes. So like warriors and wizards and soldiers. Like in Magic, there are twice as many clerics as there are merfolk. Remember that it's not just like elves, it can be warriors as well. It can be like creatures are like, especially nowadays, more and more common, like things will have multiple types. And that I think will really help make a more rounded environment than just it is elves, it is humans, it is goblins, it is zombies. Like it's an additional level, and it also adds cards that want to go in multiple decks. Like you could add a elf warrior. So the elf deck wants it, and so does the warrior deck. Like we'll touch on this more as we get into the episode, but just like having more choices, having more overlapping cards is something that you want from a good cube. You don't want lanes. Like you don't want like one thing we are really trying to avoid when putting this cube together is after pack one, everyone knowing what deck they're in and just taking the cards that go in that deck with no choice. Because then why are you even bothering to draft? Mixing them up like that, I think, really is a great way of kind of from the jump off having choices, and I think that's a key thing to keep in mind.
Yeah, for sure. So I think this is the trap, quote unquote. Maybe it's not a trap, but most sort of booster draft environments that care about creature type tend to fall into, right? You draft Bloomthrow, you first 3 cards are rabbits. I think rabbits were one of them. Yeah,
they were.
Go with rabbits. Yeah.
They beat me up many times. Yes,
they were all the same, weren't they? Yeah. And then you just like never had another decision for the rest of the draft, right? Even like the spells only really worked in one deck. You know, you were just like every pack you took the card with a picture of a rabbit on, and that was your draft. You know, and then you sat down and played some games. That's like. I think that's fine for a few drafts, right? It's like you draft the rabbits deck, yeah, that was fun, and then I went and drafted the frogs deck, and that was pretty fun. But it doesn't make me want to draft it like the 6th or 7th time, you know? It's like once I've drafted all the things, okay, I'm kind of done with this format, you know? And if you're building a cube, you kind of want it to have a little bit more longevity than that, right? So I think one way you can go about that and end up so you're not stuck in one lane immediately is that if most of the decks care about more than one creature type, right? So you might care about elves, but you might also care about druids or warriors. And probably to make that work, you have to end up in a spot where like there aren't enough elves in the cube that you're reliably going to get 14 elves in your deck, because then you'll just care about elves, right? Then there's no reason for you to dip into anything else. Whereas to me, I think it's kind of cool if it's a bit scrappier and you've got to be like, well, I only have like 7 elves, but that's kind of just enough to make this payoff work. But then I also have some druids, and there's this weird little druids payoff over here. And I've got these 2 changelings, and they're really bad, but I'm going to run them anyway because they like just about make my deck tick over. And that's, to me, is like actually a more interesting draft experience. It might be you'll have less powerful decks. Obviously, you'll have less streamlined decks, but I think it's you're providing a very different experience from a boost draft one, and I think a pretty fun one.
No, exactly. Yeah. That element of like tension is there of just like am I like what is my deck going to look like? Am I fully announced? And like not knowing that you're going to wheel everything, I think is incredibly important. Like. That is one of the points. That's one of the best parts about Booster Draft of just like, I have, which card should I take? It's so much more boring if it's like, well, it doesn't matter. I'm going to get both of them. Like you want it so that someone else wants the card that you want. Like there shouldn't be any bad cards in a cube, and like that does count. Like even if you're the one in the deck, like there should be an element of tension, which I think like that really does kind of. Which mixing up the creature types, so it is race and class matter. I think is very important, and also it's a tool because there are some cool decks that you can pull together because of it. But let's keep it going. Let's talk about talking of decks. Things that are important to consider as well is one thing that James mentioned is that it can really be a trap of it. It's just 8 people curving out, ramming their decks into each other. Whoever draws the overrun first wins. That might be fun once, maybe, see who's the fastest, but for replayability, it's not just different decks, it isn't just different archetypes, it's the key components of a deck. So, like, by that I mean having, like, making sure that aggro is represented, making sure that tempo is represented, making sure control is represented, making sure mid-range and combo are all there. Like, these are fundamentals of cube building that just because you are building a creature type matters cube doesn't mean you can ignore. You want these kind of keep, like, by the combo deck existing, it means the control deck needs to be kept in check, and by aggro existing, it means that control is, like, it's like a big game of paper, rock, scissors that we want to be there because it makes, like, these are fundamental ideas of cube that make cubes enjoyable.
Yeah, for sure. I think this. So we were talking about Bloomvrow and Lorwyn as examples of the Typal matter environments, right? I think for me, this is something Lorwyn has done really well, what Bloomvrow kind of failed at. In Bloomvrow, there were 5 creature types, I think, and there were basically 4 aggro decks and the frogs thing.
And one unplayable deck, wasn't it? Or
the frogs was kind of cool, actually. The frogs was all right. They were doing the, like, ETB bounce the frogs back to my hand. Yeah. Pond Prophet was a bit of a banger. But everything else was mostly just beating down, you know? And just wanted to sort of spew the maximum number of creatures of the appropriate type onto the battlefield as early as possible. Whereas Lorwyn, I think, has gone in quite a nice different direction where that deck still exists. Like, Kifgin is very much a beatdown deck, and that's fine. You've got to have that in the format. Then you look at Elves, for example. Elves tends to care way more about having Elves in the graveyard than having Elves on the battlefield. I think that's a cool different direction. You're still caring about your creature type. You still want to maximize your density of it, but it's not just put as many into play and make them bigger or make them hasty or first strikey or whatever it is. And then something like Elementals, which is, rather than trying to cast loads of Elementals, is trying to make mana, cast some bigger Elementals, profit, accumulate value that way. And things like Flame Raider to enable that, rather than making it easier to, rather than making your elementals in play better, it's enabling you to cast bigger elementals early. You just have more directions, you know, rather than just power and toughness and of the appropriate type.
Yeah, 100%. Like, it feels like what they've done with Lorwyn is they've thought about what can the types do that is more interesting than just curve out. And when you are building a cube with this environment, keep that in mind. Think what can creature types do that is more interesting than just curve out. So yeah, so James mentioned, yeah. Traditionally, Elves was the epitome of the curve out caster lord effect, win the game. But it's now had a bunch of graveyard stuff thrown into it as well, which is a very interesting way of taking it. Like, you can make Golgari Elves be like a graveyard matter stuff. Like Goblins as well, the epitome of, I'm going to play a bunch of goblins, I'm going to turn them sideways. But because of Modern Horizons and stuff like that, we've seen a bunch of, like, aristocraty style of things that you can go with goblins. There's like a Sling Gang Lieutenant, along with the classic of Siege Gang Commander, that are really good at throwing goblins at your opponents. That is like the basis of an aristocrat deck. That's more interesting than just Goblin Pile Driver into Lord, that kind of stuff. Like, and if you listen to our end of year episode, we talked a bunch about, like, goblin combos. That's a whole nother thing you can add, which is kind of like, it's a deck that cares about goblins, but in a different way. And it's more interesting than just, I play 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, 4-drop, win. It's kind of what we're after. Like you can just go down the list of creature types, like Angels. Angels can be flyers, but there's also a bunch of angels that do interesting stuff with life gain. There's vampires. Vampires can also be life gain, but they can also be tokens. They can also be aristocrats. They can be, like, there's a whole madness commander deck around, like, with a bunch of vampires in it. You could port that over. Like a lot of the more recent madness cards are vampires. You could that's how you can still do a Typal matter stuff, but still make it be slightly more. Yeah,
for sure. You just need to make sure you're not like essentially casting creatures that have a tick box that, hey, these are the right types. They're actually synergizing together in some other way.
Yeah, exactly. And that will be easier with creature types that have more options and more variety. So, being honest, a portion of this cube will be made up of elves, goblins, zombies, humans, because there's just more of them. Like you can do, like, my gut is you'll do more outside the box things with the ones that are more supported. But then if you want, like, tree folk, actually, tree folk probably has quite a good, like, but matters deck, like a defense matters deck. Like there's definitely some cool stuff you can do with all of the creature types. But like Kithkin, as James mentioned earlier, is going to be harder because we've just seen them less. Like Naga Shaman or like Nagas might be tricky as well if they're not snakes yet. Or
Naga might be a tough one. I think if I was going to build a Typal Matters cube now, but sort of the way I do it is I have some number of like primary supported tribes and I'm probably going to have it. So the normal default in booster draft with this is they seem to have gone for 5 supported tribes, right? They seem to have decided that's the number where they can make sure everyone has enough cards of their type. I would be tempted to go with a setup where most of the time you don't have as many cards of your type as you'd like, and you've got to like scrap for it a little bit more. I think that's cool. But then I would also seed in a bunch of cards of the sort of secondary, I think you called like the class types, right? The wizards, the soldiers, and what I want you to be doing with that, right, is you don't care about soldiers for a pack and a half, and you see this dope soldiers matter cards, and you have to go and look through all your pile again and see how many of them are soldiers, and if you can scrap together enough soldiers to make that work. And then you have changelings as a way to sort of tie the room together, right? I think you really want the changelings to be on power level worse than the other cards, right? But you're
yes, because they're almost free to go in any deck. So yeah, so like maybe not as bad as some of the ones from original Lorwyn that are very like we're not champion changelings here. We're like that's the one where you have to like exile one when it comes in, all that kind of stuff. Like, but yeah. Some of the ones from Lorwyn I think have been Lorwyn Eclipse are very good at that.
Yeah, for sure. Like the changeling skittering surveyor from Lorwyn Eclipse, for example, would be a lock, I think.
No, yeah, 100%. Just to jump back a second, just a final bit on things to consider in archetypes is some archetypes or some creature types do overlap pretty well. So we have mechanics like Party, which cares about you having clerics, rogue, warriors, and wizards. Like, that seems kind of like a pretty cool, like overarching, like almost like a package that you can add as well. So like if you're seeding those archetypes in the cube anyway, you can have like a party deck exist, and then cool, that's your like secret 11, like that's your spider spawning, if that makes sense. Like you can also do a similar thing with outlaws. That's another of these that they added in Outlaws of Thunder Junction. Outlaws cares about assassins, mercenaries, pirates, rogues, and warlocks. Kind of like that might be a bit more niche, and I probably wouldn't do both that and party. It's just a cool way you can get things to overlap, and that's, again, it's a cube. We're looking for cards that multiple people want, and then like you have very simple things, kind of like werewolves. One side is a human, one side is a werewolf. A lot of them also care about wolves as well. There's definitely a deck that's kind of like you can have a human deck in like green-white, and then you can have a werewolf deck in Gruul. That will work quite nicely because some of the cards will, like, the humans will work in both decks, but then the werewolves deck can get more out of them because they are also werewolves. Like I think that's like there's a bunch of other ways like that you can go. Like there's humans that make dogs and all this kind of stuff. Like there's ways of you can make things like this work.
Yeah, for sure. I think the other like niche sort of sub-archetype you could have in there is you scatter in a few very powerful payoffs for creature types which basically aren't supported. And those are changeling build-arounds, you know? You have to get a decent mass of changelings in order to use them. But so something like Spawning Kraken was one that came to mind, which is cares about, I think it's like when a Kraken, Leviathan, or, you know, all the like seafood creature types hit them, you make a 9/9 Kraken.
Whenever the delicious creatures deal damage.
Yeah. Whenever you visit a seafood restaurant, you make a 9/9 Kraken.
Mm-hmm.
And it's cool to have that as a little sub-archetype, right? Where it's like there aren't any actual Krakens, but there are some changelings. And maybe there's something you can do where you draft all the changelings and all those cards because no one else wants them, theoretically, because no one else can use them. And look for like the sort of interesting and very unique creature type payoffs as well, right? Something like, do you know Hakon, the Knight dude?
Ooh, that is a card that is sweet but unplayable in Commander. What does Hakon do? Hakon is 1 black for a 3/3 legendary creature zombie knight. You may cast this card from your graveyard, but not from anywhere else. And as long as Hakon is the battlefield, you may cast night spells from your graveyard, and when it dies, you lose 2 life. That's rad.
Yeah, so like if you've got a self-mill deck, right?
Yeah.
You can just mill over your Hakon, cast out of the graveyard, and now I can cast all my changelings out of the graveyard.
That's very cool.
It goes really well as well if you've got any of the like changeling instants and sorceries. Because they obviously just go right back to the graveyard when you cast them, and then you cast them again, and you can just keep going for as much mana as you have.
So you are just tar-firing them infinitum. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. We touched on changelings being a nice little blend around, but yeah, that is an additional. Again, get creative with it. That's an additional deck that you can add, which is interesting. Again, this is more interesting than just I'm going to draft all the goblins today, which is not a. I'm not saying you are wrong for doing that, but if you want to keep playing this cube, having variety like that, I think is going to be really, really good.
Yeah, for sure. You want both experiences to exist, I think, ideally, right? If someone wants to just plant their flag, they should be able to, and that's fine. But there's potential for other options.
Nice. So yeah, another thing to keep in mind when you are putting the cube together is this will kind of come into an overlap with how are the decks going to win. So again, we have our curve out, but we have our obvious one. So it's like creature lords are the most obvious way that these type of cubes and these type of decks can win. So like if you're in an elf deck, a card like Elvish Champion is going to be great for you. 1 green 2/2 creature elf. Other elf creatures get +1/+1 and have Forest Walk. If you're supporting elves and you want elf to be the aggro beatdown deck, that Lord is fantastic. And most heavily supported Typal Matters decks will have a Lord of some sort, like Lord of Atlantis back in Alpha, classic one. The other thing you can consider is if you are doing something more interesting with these archetypes, rather than just the beatdown, look for effects that the archetype wants rather than like the creature type wants. So we mentioned aristocrats and goblins. So yeah, so Sling Gunner, I'll read it out now. It's 3 and a black for a 1/1 creature goblin. When it enters, create 2 1/1 red goblin creature tokens and sack a goblin. Target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. So in this aristocrat deck, this is a really strong card. It's turning all of your other dorky goblins into direct damage. Like this is in this deck, this is a better Blood Artist because it's the sack outlet and the thing that's killing them. That might not be something that we run in just the generic goblin beatdown deck, but when we are making it when we're making the archetype do something, it immediately becomes better.
Yeah, for sure. It's about looking for payoffs that actually meet the needs of that deck, right? Not ones that just look powerful necessarily. So, for example, if you were trying to do something like slivers, well, slivers is probably going to be a bunch of colors, right? And therefore you want to prioritize the slivers that fix your mana. So there's things like, I think there's Mana Weft Sliver, which is like makes all your slivers into Birds of Paradise, and a couple of similar effects and ways to color wash your slivers. And that might actually be more valuable at the 2-drop slot than just giving your slivers +1/+1, although I'm sure you can find room for that too.
Yes, I've also lost to a muscle sliver in my time as well.
Oh, who hasn't? It's the second muscle sliver.
That's what messes you up. But yeah. So then on top of deck specific lords and deck specific and archetype specific payoffs, you have the good generic payoffs that can go in multiple decks. And kind of I'd be tempted to. I think if we're doing elves, I'd be tempted to run 1 Elvish Champion or like one way of giving my deck overrun. But I probably wouldn't do the I'd be tempted to not do the second or the third and run something like Patchwork Banner. or Urza's Incubator, something like that. So I'll read Patchwork Banner. Patchwork Banner is 3 generic for an artifact. It taps to add 1 mana of any color. As it enters, choose a creature type, and creatures you control of the chosen type get +1/+1. So this can go in any deck. It's a colorless artifact that goes in any creature type deck. And this is a card that any of the archetypes in this set or in your cube will want. Same with Urza's Incubator. Urza's Incubator is 3 generic for an artifact. As it enters, choose a creature type, and creature spells of the chosen type cost 2 generic less to cast. These are kind of like open-ended cards. Like this is like drafting a fetch land in a powered cube. Like, you know, it's going to, more than likely, it's going to get in your deck, but it leaves you open with choices. Like cards like these, I think, are very, very solid. Like these are like colorless rewards, and these are rewards. They don't have to be colorless, but they are payoffs that can go in any deck. Like, and I think they are going to be pretty strong in this environment because every deck will kind of want them.
Yeah, for sure. I think you want to be careful, though, right, not to make those payoffs better than the type-specific ones, right? Like,
yeah, I'd agree.
You don't want the best payoff to be the one that also go in every deck, right? There should be like good, but maybe not busted. Like, so for example, in something like Vanquisher's Banner, right, is so that's the 5 mana artifact. Your dudes get +1/+1. And when you cast a creature of that type, you draw a card. Super powerful card. So maybe instead of doing that, you do something like Gathering Stone from the recent set, right? Which is you look at the top card on your upkeep and you put it into your hand if it's the right type, and those types cost 1 less. Still a powerful type, but it doesn't have the onboard presence. It's not quite at that power level of Vanquisher's Banner, which means that it's going to be slightly lower power level than like the colorless payoff that goes in every deck. It shouldn't be better in your Elves deck than the Elvish Champion, I think would be the approach I would take. Yeah,
that makes sense. So maybe the Elf one should be something that gives Elves +2/+2, but the generic one gets +1/+1.
Exactly. Yeah.
No, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I think that does lead us on to a nice point of like, one thing with these generic ones is this is just something you can do when you're searching for cards for this cube, but cards that say choose a creature type are going to be stronger here, and that's kind of what James was alluding to, because they go in every deck. You can just take they're basically free to draft because you know they're going to be playable because you'll just choose your creature type. Where they get more interesting, and this is something again that James was alluding to, is when your deck isn't 14 humans. It's 9 or 10, and you've had to take some other bits from here to make a deck. When it's not affecting every card freely. And I've seen this in Lauren. I was talking with my two-headed giant partner about his singles pre-release, and like he had the very broken mythic rare from the set, like the banner, and he didn't name Kithkin or Elf or Merfolk. He named like Warrior or something like that because that was more helpful at the time, and that is what he thought would help him win the game. And that's kind of the point of it. Like even if you are the humans deck, just having that sense of like it's not guaranteed what I'm going to pick every time because of how you build the cube, because you've thought about class and creature type. That will make it more interesting. Again, more choices is always a good thing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the thing you ideally want in these cubes, right, is that you can... Because you don't want it to be, like, overwhelmingly complex and inaccessible. So you want people to be able to, like, draft it the easy way and pick their creature type, and, like, if they found an open lane, it be okay. But you want there to be another level beyond that as well, right? Where you're doing more complex stuff, where you're maybe caring about multiple types, where you're maybe you have a slightly more in-depth strategy than the sort of on the face of it what this creature type does.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
So also, when we were talking about spoke about the choose a creature type cards. We're mostly focusing on cube design here, but a little bit of draft strategy, I think, for these cubes. You should prioritize those cards very highly early in the draft because they're going to let you actually see what's open rather than the last thing you want to do, right, is take your elves, build around, pack one, pick one, take a medium elf and then a bad elf, and then realize that the person next to you is also drafting elves, right? And that's how you train wreck, right? When you do that and you don't let go fast enough. Whereas if you take a couple of those choose a creature type cards early, that lets you actually figure out what you're seeing before you pick a lane.
No, exactly. Yeah, the train wrecking part of it does kind of summarize all of my experience of Bloomburrow, if I'm honest with you. But I think that is partly because that set was way more harsh, because if you weren't specifically like you could be in the colors, but if you weren't in the archetype, it really punished you. And I think that's why I think with this we're trying to get across a little bit of having more options so you can pivot out, because in Bloomburrow it was the 5, but that was it. That's kind of why we're that's kind of why we're talking about have your key creature types, but then have their jobs as well, and I can pivot into that, or I can pivot into my party matters deck, or I can pivot into changelings, or just having more options means that you're not going to have a draft finish and 4 people are like, yeah, I got the best elf, goblin, zombie, human deck, and the other 4 are like, I got the worst elf, goblin, zombie, human deck. Do you know what I mean? That's kind of where we're trying to get with this a little bit.
Yeah, cause the issue we had in Bloomburrow, right, was that if you say you started off in green-white rabbits and you're 6 picks into a draft, you have 4 green cards, 2 white cards for doing the rabbit thing, and you've realized that rabbits is an open, right, you're getting cut. Actually, frogs is the place I need to be. I'm getting past all the good frog stuff. Great, let's pivot over there. Frogs is green-blue, should be an easy pivot. I have mostly green cards. Doesn't work because your green cards that you took for your rabbits deck don't work in the frogs deck. You need a completely different set of cards. There's maybe 1 or 2 removal spells at common which transfer, and everything else is works in one deck or the other. So you want to build in cards which allow you to do that pivoting, right?
Yeah, I mean, I swear there was less in that in Blue, because there was a bunch of cards that were cheaper or easier to cast if you had one of the creature type. There's a bunch of I remember because I've been going through my chaff boxes recently and building decks from them. Isn't there a bounce or a fight that's cheaper if you target a frog, which is playable in the rabbit deck, but so punishing if you've taken that as some removal and then you have to pivot afterwards.
Yeah. It was. Yeah, that's a great point, actually. Even for removal spells didn't pivot. It's kind of rough, yeah.
Yeah, I feel every time I drafted that set, I was in the colours that were open, but just not in... I just wasn't seeing the creatures to make the synergy work. But anyway, we're trying to avoid that in the ones that we build for ourselves. Some other things I do kind of want to consider, in terms of cards that are generally going to be better in this type of environment where there's a bunch of creatures running around, is cards that care about creatures. Cards that care about you casting or playing creatures or number of creatures in play are going to be more important in this cube, because it's not... You can't just run a cube that, this isn't Scourge. We can't just have every effect be on a creature. We are going to run instant and sorceries, but it's likely we're going to run slightly more creatures in this cube, maybe 10% more in this cube, because there will be some effects that we can get on creatures, but there still has to be a balance. It can't be all creatures, but it's still going to be a higher percentage of creatures. So cards that care about creatures will get better. So I'm thinking something like Impact Tremors. It's a 1 red for an enchantment that deals the damage when a creature we control enters the battlefield. That's going to be better in this environment than a regular cube, because there's just naturally more creatures for you to draft. Same with a card like Guardian Project. It's another enchantment that whenever a non-token creature enters under our control, if it doesn't share a name, which it will do in cube, we draw a card. We are going to have more hits in this. Our deck is probably going to be 3 or 4 more creatures than a regular cube draft, because we're trying to get that synergy. So cards like those get better just because our deck is a higher proportion of creatures, so they're going to be triggering more often.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the really big difference, right, is that you just aren't going to have the 4 or 5 creature control deck, right? You're not going to... I think pretty much every deck in most of these cubes is going to have a minimum of 12 to 13 creatures, right? Because otherwise you're just not going to have any of these Typal synergy.
Yeah. I definitely agree with that. I think so. That's kind of cards to consider. Let's kind of just talk about general cube construction, some final things to kind of keep in mind when you're choosing cards to go in a Typal Matters cube. And I think one of the key things is check the wording on older cards. And this will very much define how you want this to work, because a lot of older cards say number of the creature in play not you control. I played in Onslaught block, which had a lot of this. Well-Wisher mirrors are kind of miserable. Well-Wisher, 1 green, 1/1, creature elf. You tap it to gain 1 life for each elf on the battlefield. That's not you control, that's on the battlefield. Say my opponent has the Well-Wisher and I have a bunch of changelings, it will count those. The majority of older Typal Matters cards will be worded this way. There's a bunch of slivers that care about all slivers. There's a bunch of slivers that care about just the ones you control. Keep that in mind, because if you are running changelings, which we're probably which we are suggesting is a nice way of filling in the gaps, that will come up. So just keep that in mind, because it can be a kind of a feel bad to some newer players who are not used to that, because it's something they fixed because it didn't feel fair.
Yeah, I think this is very much depends on your outlook, right? Whether you think this is a feature or a bug. In my mind, it's cooler if there's that counterplay, right? Because,
I do agree, but it is worth mentioning, I think.
Yes, but you should be thinking about your playgroup when you decide which one you want, right? Do you want Lord of Atlantis, which is cool and buffs your opponent's Merfolk and gives them Island Walk against your mono-blue deck? Or do you want Master of the Pearl Trident, which does not? It is a very valid point, but it's not a fun thing to find out about on the fly, you know?
Yes. It happened to me once, quite recently. It was a card from Odyssey that they reprinted in Dominaria Remastered. We did a Dominaria Remastered draft. I played this in my White X deck. Divine Sacrament. 1 white enchantment. White creatures get +1/+1. Threshold. White creatures get an additional +1/+1 as long as there are 7 or more cards in your graveyard. I played this, and then my opponent killed all my white creatures and then played their own white creatures. So Savage. Rude. But that is symmetrical. And at the time I was this is rubbish, blah. But it's a thing of but because in this cube, because you're going to be mixing wordings, that's more what it is. It's unlikely all of your cards are going to say, or all of the cards are going to have the old wording, or all the cards are going to have the new wording. There's a chance, it's something to consider just to avoid feel bads, basically.
Yeah, for sure. And it's, I think it's fine to have both in, but just bear in mind it adds to the sort of overall complexity of your cube, right? And I think that is something you need to bear in mind at all points. I think we've touched on this in previous episodes. In my mind, you kind of have a sort of complexity budget, which you're able to spend, which is going to be different depending on your play group and the sort of play experience you're going for. But you can't dial the complexity up to 11 on every single axis, right? Or for a lot of playgroups, or it just becomes kind of overwhelming as a first draft experience, and people just might not want to draft it anymore because they just spent an hour being confused and then lost.
Exactly, yeah, and that's a great reason why this is the hard and fast way you 100% build a cube like this, because you are going to you might like that complexity if you're listening to this. You might hate that complexity. That's a decision for you and your play group. It's just something we wanted to bring up because I think it's important. Another thing that I think is quite important, just from a deck construction point of view, if you're building an archetype, and that's not all your type matters cards have to be obvious, or they don't have to be on creatures. I'm I'm thinking I mentioned this deck earlier, but like you could have quite a cool spider spawning deck in a cube that has a bunch of like archetypes that are doing a self-mill thing. Maybe you have like elves in Golgari, you have goblins, or you have zombies or fairies in Dimir doing a self-mill thing. And then you have a couple of spider lords and some of the spider spawning effects that make a bunch of spiders. You don't need to run 15 spiders to make that deck work. That deck wants to just wants creatures and then the spider spawning style effects. Like there is spider spawning, and then I think there's another effect that there's one or two effects that do a similar thing nowadays. You that is a deck that you can make work by 2 or 3 spider lords on those cards if the rest of the archetype is there because it's what your cube is doing. Like keep that in mind. Like really get creative with it. I think that's a great way of adding more diversity. And also people like secret spider spawning deck back in 2026. Let's go.
Yeah, that sounds pretty cool. Yeah, I think it's always, and cards like spider spawning, right, are cool because if you're doing the self-mill thing anyway, you don't need to put in many slots to make that work, right? You can probably make it work with just the choose a creature type and you choose spider and you do a bunch of the self-mill stuff. And that's like, maybe normally you're choosing elves or whatever, but you have this other angle to your deck where sometimes you choose spider and make lots of spiders.
Yeah, 100%. Like there's a bunch of elves that actually make insects. Like maybe that's the way you take it actually. You've got cards like Azoni, Thousand Eye, and Vile Spawn Spider, which can make a bunch of insects depending on the number of creature cards in your graveyard. Like maybe it's that over specifically spiders, and then you run some insect payoffs. But yeah, generally I think that's a very cool deck you can build as well. And I think rounding it off, like this is kind of the next thing I want to talk about. Just kind of, it does to an extent go against everything that we've currently talked about, but I think it's important to kind of keep in mind, and that not every card in this cube has to be a creature type matters card. Like, you don't have to make all your cards too specific. This is not Commander. Like, in Commander, you can go really deep and, like, every elf. Like, all my card draw, elf. All my interaction, elf. All my ramp, well, quite easy, but elf. Like, that's not how this is going to be. Like what we... By this, what I'm saying is, like, your key staples, I think it's okay to keep some of them generic. By that, I mean, like, white and black removal, like blue card draw and counter magic, like black hand attack, red burn, and green ramp. These are staples that you kind of that you need to just make decks exist. And it can be very tempting, as I said, to make them all be specific creature types. But kind of like, what happens if all of my red interaction is on goblins? It can get it can be hoovered up by one player or two players, or it can send mixed signals to players, and kind of like, you need room for generic effects to kind of like to grow and flush and work. Kind of like I think a great example is that kind of like every blue deck or most blue decks will want some kind of counter magic, some kind of interaction on the stack. So, and like it can be very tempting to kind of like, if you're doing fairies in blue, you run Spell Stutter Sprite. That's 1 and a blue for a flash fairy that counters a spell with mana X or less when it comes into play, where X is the number of fairies you control. Great payoff for a fairies deck. But if that's the only counter spell in your cube, what does the non-blue fairy what does the non-blue fairy deck get? What does like my Simic Merfolk deck get? This is where generic bits can be important, and like it. I do not have hard numbers for everyone listening, but but it's going to be tailored to the cube, and like my gut is that kind of like, it's fine to run Spell Stutter Strike as a reward for the fairy player, but you then want to run 1 or 2 additional bits for anyone to pick up to go in any, and like I mentioned Tarfire earlier. That's fine to go in a cube if it has goblins, because the other that's at least more open ended, if that makes sense. Like, it's still a shock in another deck. I think these kind of like finding like not being too strict is a key part of this cube, which is different to Commander, where everything you try and synergize everything a lot of the time. With this, you're not doing that, I think is a fair way of saying it.
Yeah, for sure. You need the you're still going to want your generic interaction spots, and And those cards can sort of have some interaction with creature type, right? You can run, for example, the ones which are like a removal spell that's a little bit better if I've got elf. That's fine. That still kind of counts as your generic interaction spell because you could also run it in a non-elf deck and it would be totally fine. But something like Spellstorcer's Surprise, a great example, doesn't count as one of your counter spells in this cube, really, if you're following some metrics on those lines, because for probably the majority of the people drafting blue, it's not going to work as a counter spell for them, right?
I think actually, yeah, what you just said, maybe not including the payoffs in your count, I think is a good way of. I think it's actually a nice way of doing it. Yeah,
exactly. Like 100%. If you're doing fairies, run Spellstorcer's Fright. It's a sweet card, but just be aware it doesn't really replace a generic counter spell in your cube.
No, definitely, that makes sense.
Where do you stand on the cards that modify creature type? So stuff like Maskwood Nexus, sort of basically makes everything all creature types on your side. Are you thinking like that's makes it less interesting because because then it doesn't matter what types you drafted, or is it an interesting build around where you've got to dedicate a whole card slot to this, but then it unlocks something else in your deck?
I think that's cool. I think it's similar to the like 5-color changeling deck. I see it as like if you can find like a package of cards that work with those, then I think that's quite nice because there is a world where kind of they just become like it's almost like the conspiracies that let you play or like that let your lands tap for any color.
Yeah,
they're kind of like that, and I think it's I think they are very strong, but they're very strong if you see them in pack 1, would be my gut.
Yeah, that kind of checks out.
Because
and you need your decks to still work when you haven't drawn it, right? So
exactly, it's very much one of like if you don't see I like it as a deck building constraint. I think that's cool. My gut, so yeah, it's very much like you could build a deck that does not work unless you see those effects. And that probably won't be great, but if it's a way of unlocking some more powerful cards, like if it's a way of like turning on a couple of powerful lords in your deck, then I think that's a cool way of building it. So yeah, so I could definitely see those finding a slot.
Yeah, I think it could be an interesting angle, right? But yeah, it'd be interesting to see how it plays out anyway.
Where I thought you were going with that question was like old bad illusions.
Sure.
But yeah, cards like Mistform Dreamer is where I thought you were going with it, like a 2 and a blue 2/1 illusion with flying that you can pay 1 to make it become the creature type of your choice until end of turn. Like these. This is changelings before we had changelings. I thought that's where you were going with it.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, the thing with all the old creatures like that, right, is that if you want them to be playable in your cube, you often have to be doing a whole retro cube thing because the rate on creatures from those blocks is so bad. It's you end up in the spot where they have to synergize amazingly well to reach the level of like a draft uncommon in a normal set without any synergy at all,
Ooh, I do like a card like Trickery Charm from that set, though. That could be quite fun. Like there's got to be more effects like this. But basically, it's a single blue for an instant that has 3 options. We don't care about 2 of them. But its middle ability is target creature becomes the creature type of your choice until end of turn. That seems really funny. Like turning off a creature, they lord a creature somehow, and they're you turn off creature types until end of turn. That could be a really funny way of going in this type of stuff. Like I don't know if there's enough of those effects, but like having creatures lose their creature type to stop their buff from their lord effect or stop their deck synergy seems like a very funny control deck.
That's kind of cool. I bet because it looks really narrow on first glance, right? But I bet in one of these cubes, most games you actually can find a really good spot for that.
Yeah.
Like even if it's just winning a combat or something, like they make a bunch of attacks in with their buffed creatures and then you debuff them and win the combat, right? Yeah, it could be an interesting one. It's kind of cool against the there's a bunch of sweepers which are like destroy all permanents except for this type, right? It's good against them.
That seems very strong. Yeah. Ooh, actually, I found a repeatable version. A natural selection, 1 blue, 1 mana, choose a creature type other than wall.
Wall
that's really funny. Target creature becomes that type until end of turn. That's really funny, actually. Like again, this is why, this is where for me these cubes become interesting, when you can do something interesting or do something so far outside the box, like turn a control deck that turns off people's creature type seems really funny to me.
Yeah, I quite like that. I think that might be one to look into.
No, phenomenal.
Also, I think if it ever comes up, I really want I think we should play with the old walls rule.
Yes.
Walls inherently can't attack.
I do like that. Would they have changed that when they added changelings? Because if changelings are every creature type, they would be walls and limit.
That makes loads of sense, actually. That was probably the reason. Okay, maybe we shouldn't play with the old rule stacks if that means changelings always have to defend. That might be kind of rough for the changeling stack.
That would be very funny. All right. As is often the case, James, we found ourselves in a rabbit hole. Let's put ourselves out and let's end this episode. But I think these types of cubes have a lot of potential. Like they do seem a very good way of giving, a lot of players like Typal matters, and I think this is a great way of for an entry level cube or converting a commander collection into a cube. I think this is going to be quite easy for a lot of people because they'll have a lot of the cards and a lot of the payoffs and that kind of stuff. I think, it's stuff people like, and I think that obviously that now Lauren is out again, people are kind of now we've had a good one. I think that's what I'm going to say. I love the art of Bloomburrow. It was adorable. The draft format did not vibe with me, but now we've had a good one. I hope people have found this episode helpful in terms of putting together their own environments doing this type of thing.
When I thought about Typal Matters cubes previously, I kind of thought, I've always thought they'll just be really on rails and get a bit dull. But talking about the options for this, actually, I think they could be really cool. And I think there's a lot of interesting design space with it.
What's that, James? I need a 5th cube. My God, we've done it.
Sometimes you just don't have a choice, you know?
No. Sometimes, yeah. It wasn't my fault, wifey. They made me do it. All right. Let's end it there. James, pleasure, man. Thank you very much for that. That was a really good chat.
Yeah, always a pleasure.
Wonderful. Just leaves me to thank you all very much for listening. Do give the podcast a 5-star review, tell a friend, all that good stuff. Whatever positive affirmation you could give to the podcasting platforms, the podcasting gods would greatly help us out. Until next week, it's goodbye from me, and it's goodbye from James, and we'll see you all soon. Goodbye.